Royal Malta Artillery. Extracts from a book, published in 1939, by Captain J.V. Abela. Long before Malta became a British possession, in fact, while it still belonged to the Knights of St. John, Maltese soldiers were serving Great Britain, for companies of artillery were raised for service in Corsica, then under British protection. The history of the Maltese units of the British Army dates from the siege of the French by the Maltese, 1798 to 1800. In September 1798, the French garrison in the capital, Valletta, was besieged by the Maltese who had risen in revolt. The Maltese were joined a year later by a small British expeditionary force consisting of 2 battalions which came from Messina. To these were shortly afterwards added a small number of Neapolitan troops. General Graham, however, decided that the troops at his disposal were insufficient to carry out his plan of operations, and determined, with the sanction of the British government, to raise a Maltese battalion, the men enlisting for a period of 2 years. This was called I Cacciatori Maltesi, or Maltese Light Infantry, with British officers attached from the Royal Marines, the 30th Regiment and the 89th Regiment, and also some Maltese officers. This regiment distinguished itself during the siege, as well as during the expedition sent to Elba in 1801 to dispossess the French of that island. The service of the men expired in 1802, and to conform with Article X of the Treaty of Amiens, 1802, 2 infantry battalions of 1,000 men each were formed. These were called the Maltese Provincial Battalions, and shortly after they were reduced to 700 men each. The other 300 men being formed into 2 other battalions, 1, the Malta Coast Artillery, for service at the different towers round the island, and 2, the Maltese Veterans for guards in offices and public places. The artillery wore the same uniform as the British artillery. In 1815 all the existing units were incorporated into one infantry regiment of 10 companies, the Royal Malta Fencibles. For some years, 3 of the companies were utilized for artillery purposes. In 1825, it was decided that the officers were to be all Maltese, and their commissions were to be granted by the sovereign. Their appointment to the regiment or unit, being published in the London Gazette. Authority was also given, for Maltese to be enlisted in the British regiments, serving in Malta and Gibraltar, up to 5% of their establishment. And for any Maltese who wished to join the Royal Navy to be accepted. In 1855, the Home Government proposed to raise a 2nd battalion for service overseas, but owing to the unacceptable rates of pay and conditions, this unit did not materialize. The establishment of the Royal Malta Fencibles varied from time to time, and in 1861 it was converted into an artillery corps of 6 batteries, and styled the Royal Malta Fencible Artillery, the term fencible being dropped in 1889. In 1882, a battery of 100 volunteers from the regiment proceeded to Egypt, under their own officers, to take part in the campaign. They were first employed in Alexandria, later going to Dumyat and Cairo. Their services were highly appreciated, and in recognition, the motto, Egypt 1882 was authorized to be borne. The establishment was altered several times. In 1899, 2 batteries were raised for service overseas, and the first one served in Egypt from 1900 to 1905. Owing to the change in government policy and the difficulty of keeping up the strength of the regiment, at a time when the Admiralty contractors had to import foreigners to make up the required number of workmen to construct a breakwater and a dock, these batteries were subsequently disbanded. During the Great War, a detachment from the regiment joined the Egyptian Expeditionary Force. and several officers served with British units in other theatres of war. The strength was more than doubled, but in 1920 it was again reduced to 441 all ranks, consisting of headquarters and 3 batteries. Recruiting on a large scale has now been proceeding for some months. And judging by the statement made by the Secretary of State of War, when presenting recently the Army estimates for 1939, its establishment in a few months will be over 1,600. The Royal Malta Artillery is a unit of the regular forces, and although the men enlist for service in Malta and its dependencies only, it is in fact an imperial force. Money for pay and maintenance being voted annually by the Imperial Parliament. Until recently, the primary role of the regiment was coast defence, but anti-aircraft batteries are to be formed in the near future. And it will not be long before the regiment will have an important share in the air defence of the fortress. Officers and men alike are Maltese, and the Maltese language is the principal medium of instruction and conversation with most of the gunners. English, however, is invariably used for orders, correspondence and instruction of NCOs. All ranks are encouraged to speak English and a library well stocked with books, newspapers and periodicals is provided. All examinations for educational certificates and proficiency pay are on the same lines and standards as for the British troops. Education is compulsory, and it is gratifying to see that in spite of the fact that the Maltese soldier has to master the English language, in order to obtain any of the Army certificates of education, a large number succeed in passing the examinations, some obtaining the first and special certificates. The regiment has a military band, which performs the duty of a station band for the whole of the Royal Artillery in Malta. Also a dance band which is entirely self-supporting. Both bands have a very good reputation, and nearly all the bandsmen play for civilian bands in their spare time. Some of these musicians are actually conductors of these bands. Regimental headquarters and 2 of the batteries are quartered in the old fort of St. Elmo in Valletta, the scene of the greatest acts of heroism of the Knights of St. John and their soldiers, during the Great Siege in 1565. The old chapel of the Knights still exists within the walls of the fort. In it they received the last sacraments, before they went to their posts to await the final attack of the Turk, to which there could only be one end, after the severe battles of the previous days. Today, this chapel is used for the regimental church parades. Officers. Commissions in the Royal Malta Artillery are granted to candidates who qualify at the Army Entrance Examination, Royal Military Academy syllabus, or to graduates of the Royal University of Malta, selected by His Excellency the Governor. Successful candidates are gazetted as second lieutenants, and commence their military training forthwith in the regiment. After some months, they proceed to the United Kingdom, where they attend the young officers' courses at Larkhill and Shoeburyness, and generally another course such as education, anti-gas, etc. After a certain number of years' service, some of the officers attend other courses in the UK, including signalling, physical training and other courses at the artillery schools, and the gunnery staff course. Promotion is by length of service. The conditions being exactly similar to those introduced for the British Army in August last. The regiment has its own instructor in gunnery, medical officer and chaplain, honorary. The medical officer retains the old Army title of surgeon prefixed to his rank. All the officers speak some other language, generally Italian and/or French, besides English and Maltese, and many qualify as Army interpreters. The dress is the same as that for the Royal Artillery, excepting the badges and helmet flash. In these days of old school ties, It may be interesting to mention that the regimental tie has a small double zigzag, instead of the single broad one of the Royal Artillery. But the colours are the same. Other ranks. With the exception that their service is limited only to Malta and its dependencies, recruits are enlisted for the normal British engagement of 12 years, re-engagement for a further 9 years where applicable, and continuance in the service beyond 21 years, from year to year. Up to last year, 1939, the periods of service were 7 years with the colours and 5 with the reserve. Latterly these have been varied to 4 and 8, 5 and 7, etc., to adjust the flow of men transferring to the reserve. A special army order last October published certain improvements in the pay and conditions of pension of the soldiers. And a man is now eligible for a pension after 21 years service, instead of 30 years. Until recently, recruits training was carried out under regimental arrangements. But now all recruits, including those for British units, go to the training depot, which is being formed in Fort Ricastle, to be administered by the regiment. The training of the recruit, and later of the gunner, is similar to that of the Royal Artillery, and needless to say, the same textbooks and manuals are used. Collective training is carried out in winter and spring, whilst summer and autumn are devoted to individual training. The men get their annual leave in summer, and many avail themselves of the opportunities afforded by His Majesty's ships, to go on cruises, 46 proceeding during 1938. Like the officers, several of the other ranks attend courses of instruction in the United Kingdom, not only at the artillery schools but also cookery, education, physical training, signalling, etc. In the sporting sphere, the regiment does not lag behind other units serving in Malta, and although it has not been to the fore in athletics, it can hold its own in aquatics. In 1938, it won the principal aquatic events, viz., the Command Officers Boat Race, 6th time since 1927, the Command Boat Race, 12th time since 1924, the Command Aquatic Sports Cup. At water polo the regiment was runner-up. Rifle shooting is also very popular. And the Collingwood Cup, a highly coveted trophy, was won for the second year in succession. Whilst the Royal Artillery Challenge Cup has been won every year since 1925. In conclusion, it may be stated that all ranks are intensely proud to belong to this unique corps of the British Army. And the proposed increase in the establishment, to over 3 times its former strength, is regarded as undoubted proof of the estimation with which this unit of His Majesty's forces is regarded. The author: Captain J.V. Abela, R.M.A. Later, Lieutenant Colonel J.V. Abela, Order of the British Empire, Knight of the Venerable Order of St. John, Knight of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. Lieutenant Colonel J.V. Abela, OBE, was born in Balzan, Malta, on the 31st of December 1903. He had a distinguished military career, and was a man of widest interests. He was gazetted second lieutenant in the Royal Malta Artillery in 1925, and wrote this book on the eve of World War II. Captain J.V. Abela was in for a busy time in the lead up to the war. He took over command of an anti-aircraft searchlight battery, newly formed on the 25th of March 1939, on the 1st of May 1939, and on the 30th of June 1939, the battery converted to anti-aircraft, with 3-inch, 20 hundredweight, anti-aircraft guns. The battery was renamed 5 Anti-Aircraft Battery RMA, and on general mobilization, in August 1939, occupied Delimaru and Talcroc AA positions. this being the first instance of an RMA battery deploying in an anti-aircraft role. It was at a time when 2nd Regiment RMA was being formed, and it came together on 2nd of December 1939. By this time the author was battery commander, as major. In May 1940, 2nd Regiment lost 5 heavy anti-aircraft battery RMA, for service in the Middle East. Major J.V. Abela RMA, as battery commander, led the battery to Egypt on the 7th of May 1940, initially manning their 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns at Wardian and Abuka. The battery served in Egypt from 1940 to 1943. 5HAA battery was the only Maltese unit to serve outside Malta in World War II. The 216 officers and soldiers in the battery were all volunteers. Before leaving Malta, the Governor-General, General Sir Charles Bonham Carter, had sent a message saying, "I am confident that Major Abela and his men will uphold and enhance the high reputation, already earned by your regiment for zeal and efficiency." Both gun positions, at Wardian and Abuka, saw action soon after. But there were no casualties, with one enemy aircraft hit. Redeployment from Wardian gun position to Canopus concentrated the battery to a 2-mile radius. Major Abela also assumed tactical control of the Egyptian Army's anti-aircraft guns in the area. On the 11th of July 1940, Major Abela was awarded the MBE. Air activity continued over all locations over the following months. With the German occupation of Greece and Crete, the battery was in action almost every night in May 1941. Towards the end of June 1941, the battery was relieved and moved out of the Abuka area. An RAF order issued then at Abuka stated, "The battery has carried out our defense practically since war started, and judging from results, it has done it very well. Apart from this, the battery has done much to justify the high esteem in which we all hold the inhabitants of Malta. Best wishes and thanks accompany Major Abela and his battery to their new destination." On the 21st of August 1941, Major Abela handed over command to Major LP Mifsud, at Port Fouad. The author retired from the Army as Lieutenant Colonel. On leaving, he did not stop serving his country. He went on and became head of the Malta Civil Defence, and gave voluntary service in the Boy Scouts Association as Island Commissioner, St John's Ambulance Brigade as Commissioner, the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme as Chairman, and Chairman of the Malta Playing Fields Association, where he has the playing field at Sakkaya, named after him.